war, defence spending goes up for obvious reasons, and suddenly we've got Ukraine and Russia with wider threats. We've got Israel, Hamas, Gaza. We've now got the Houthis supporting, but also we're getting drawn into it. The possibility that Iran is behind it and it's a proxy war for them. The Defence Select Committee meeting, is this going to be a gin and tonic party, or do you think they're going to actually get down to business this time?
Well, the House Comms and Defence Committee has just released a report, 4th of February, called Are We Ready for War? And they've sort of concluded, no, we're not. And I should make clear, there was a lot of stuff in the media about this that was trying to sensationalise it. Because, of course, we're not ready for war, it said. You've also got former President Trump saying we're on the brink of World War III. And you've also got General Sanders, head of the British Army, saying we need to go to conscription to bring people in if we were going to war, all of which has really scared people. And the harsh reality is that we're not on the verge of World War III. We can examine that a bit in a moment. But the harsh reality is the House Commons Defence Committee was looking at is the provision of our military, how much money we spend on it, what it's got, what its readiness is it suitable for today's threat environment? Because they were very, very complimentary about the military themselves. They said they always do more than they're funded to do, and that's one of the problems. The one big issue they said is that for every 8 people leaving, only 5 are joining, which is creating a manpower issue for the services. And I know firsthand from colleagues who are in the military, particularly I know that some Air Force outfits, particularly the Typhoon Force, are running white hot at the moment. And I know the boys and girls serving there are loving it. They love serving their country. They love being out at the front line. But when you're running white hot, they get burnt out. And all that means is they leave earlier than the service would have expected them to.
And wanted them to.
And that means that, and if for every one guy who leaves before his time, you turn the tap on to get a replacement in. But even if they join the service today, you've at least 5 years before that individual jumps on the front line.
And it takes a long time to grow a general. In my business, if you lose your chief executive, you can hire a new one.
Yes.
You can't just go out and hire a general.
No, because there's so much experience and expertise in there. But it's more, I think, particularly for a lot of the senior officers, you can, sometimes fresh blood is useful. But when you're looking at specific skill sets, whether it's in the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force, for the Air Force particularly, it's a really long training time for pilots. These are complicated pieces of equipment. And therefore, keeping people, and for a few years, when the pandemic was running, for example, the airlines practically shut down. There were no routes for pilots outside, so people coming back into the service, we didn't have a problem. Now, the airlines are recruiting like mad. They've stopped the training schools for ages. They're desperately trying to get pilots in from the military. So are some of our Middle East partners are also trying to attract people, and that means there's a pull. Now, you can't replace flying a military jet. I mean, it's just something special. But if you start to weary of it because you're running white hot, and that's what the House of Commons Defence Committee was saying.
So if you were to look into your crystal ball, what do you think the outcome? So I guess in the extreme, the context might be that the post-war, post-Second World War arms race, again, driven by the uncertainty that war creates, people like Russia and America are on 15% of their GDP, just a horrendous amount of money on defence. Obviously, the nuclear race was part of that. Everything's calmed down now, and the US is 4%, Russia 4%, Poland 4%, UK 2%. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen?
One of the challenges, I think, and we're going to explore this, I think, over the coming weeks and months with the general election this year. There's a lot of talk politically about 2% is not enough. The Conservatives are talking about we aspire to 2.5%. But in the same breath, the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says it's a more dangerous world than we've had in our lifetime. When Margaret Thatcher was last in that post, it was 4%. of our GDP spent on defence. So it feels from a military perspective is that talk is cheap. Ultimately, if you genuinely believe it's a more dangerous world, if you don't match that with resources, I mean, vision without funding is hallucination. It's one thing having the words, but unless it's backed up by money, and I'm a pragmatist at heart. You know, we live in a country which has got a huge overdraft. We need the NHS, we need everything else. But the number one priority of any government is to protect its nation. And I think it's really interesting, the political language around this. House Commons Defence Committee, that report is a sort of pan MPs group. It's not a particular Conservative, Labour or otherwise. What it is doing though is providing a sort of a method by which some of these politicians can bang the drum a bit. And so it's one thing to say our military is not ready. What are you going to do about it?
So over the coming weeks and months then, with an election looming, we're going to hold those who talk and those who do, the military, maybe hold them to account and see exactly what their different policies are when they're scrutinised and put under the microscope, because the difference between 2% and 4% is a lot of money. And where are you going to steal it from? Very difficult to put taxes up. We're living into the highest tax burden we have in decades. What are you going to do? You're going to, we've just announced, or they're just about to announce, that the pension age will go to 71 all of a sudden. That's not good news. Where's the money going to come from? It's going to be difficult politically, isn't it?
It's going to be very difficult politically. And that's why I don't think we're trying to be mischievous about it. We're just, as taxpayers, saying, okay, it's one thing to say this, but are you sincere about it? I think what's fascinating as well is part of this goes back to what is our role in the world. When I was in the Ministry of Defence, the way that you build your defence budget effectively is you look at military tasks. So the government says, military task 1, defend this island. The MOD looks at ways to do that, whether it's through air, land or maritime, comes up with a suite of options. The government chooses how it wants to do that, and that is what's provisioned. So, for example, in the air, we have 24/7 cover for typhoons, providing quick reaction alert anywhere in the country. And likewise, our Navy and Army colleagues have high readiness forces ready to go. But when you look at the other military tasks, some of them are, we're looking at threats around the world and deciding what contribution we would need to be prepared to make to a NATO force in response to a particular scenario. That might be a large land footprint, large number of soldiers, it might be a large naval footprint, it might be a large air footprint. Then there's a question of concurrency. Would that situation over there and this one happen at the same time? In which case, clearly, you need more resources, or are we going to assume they're not concurrent? Thirdly, you've got to look at how long that commitment would be. Is it a go in, do the job, come out again, or is it enduring? All of those things create a set of assumptions, and upon those assumptions are based how many ships, tanks and aeroplanes you need, how big your armed forces are. The danger is obviously you get used, rarely do actual military operations marry the assumptions, and therefore you generally, the politicians say, right, we need your military to do that. Our leadership are, one of the many failings, which is a good thing and a bad thing, is their can do and therefore do it. So we're always doing more in the military than their provision for. But I think it's back to what's our place in the world. Can we really afford to be taking big bets with our military around the world when we don't pay for it? And that's a really difficult one for our government to wrestle with, because ultimately we are a small island nation. We aspire to be bigger, more influential on the world stage than maybe our size permits. But if we want to maintain doing that, you've got to spend the money. And that's part of the challenge.
Yeah. Well, I don't feel sorry for them when we say it's tough. That's their job. I was going to say that's what they get paid the big bucks for, but actually they don't get paid big bucks, do they? Actually. So this is one we're going to follow then, and if we can, we're going to get things under the microscope, as we've said, and get these guys to own up to what they're really going to do.